May I invite Tarun Nagia, a wonderful friend of mine who has been thick and thin in running the show. He's been of a great support to me and a conceptualizer. And legally speaking, with Tarun Nagia, one of the most famous TV show which he anchors with the legal entities, with the Supreme Court retired judges, sitting judges, and Supreme Court advocates. So he is a wonderful moderator intern. So I am leaving the dice to Mr. Tarun, and he takes it from here.
Thank you, Priyadarshini, and it is good to be back here. I was here last year, though this gathering was held at a different place, and it is a pleasure to be here this year also. And first of all, I would like to thank Prime Point Foundation and Priyadarshini, who's got this afternoon together. And may I welcome Professor C. Raj Kumar, Vice Chancellor of Jindal Global University. Also Vikas Arya from the DAV group to please come on stage and good to see you.
How are you doing?
Without much ado, I will start this afternoon by telling you a short story before we start this discussion. This was in the year 2008. In the year 2008, I met a 33-year-old man in the city of Pune. It was at the Le Méridien Hotel. That man and me, I was working with a newspaper that time. And we met over coffee. He said that he had a vision to set up a university which would be a university that India had not seen. I remember we had a discussion with that man about why India loses a lot of foreign exchange, because a lot of students from this country go and spend money abroad. But when this university comes up, which will be in the form of a law school and then other faculties, will ensure that we have world-class education in India. That man is none other than Professor C. Raj Kumar, who ended up setting one, if I may say, bringing up India's map on the world stage. This university that he set up is, in a sense, known and spoken of in almost all continents of the world. That is to Mr. C. Raj Kumar's credit, and many, many congratulations to you with what you have done at Jindal Global Law School. And I also would like to welcome Vikas Arya from the DAV group. He is not only in the field of education, he had a career as an investment banker earlier. So he brings that expertise with him. And I like people from varied backgrounds who choose education, because in India, we don't see that. Not many people would choose education, but I would like to congratulate Mr. Arya for that, taking that decision and ensuring that education gets fine minds like you. And we'll get straight to the topic today, being the topic of how, in a sense, digital education has been spurred because of COVID. I think I've got the two best panelists to speak on that. And we will start with introductory comments. May I request Professor Raj Kumar to start with laying the ground of the discussion with his introductory comment, and then we move on to Vikas Arya.
Thank you very much, Tarun. And first of all, I want to congratulate Prime Point Foundation as well as Priyadarshini and other distinguished individuals who have put together this event, and also for honoring the parliamentarians for their contribution. And I'm very delighted that we are having this panel discussion. It was illuminating to hear the previous panel discussion. I think it also ties in very well with what we're discussing today. I thought I'll just, in terms of introductory comments, what I want to say is that I think it is only fair to say that the last over 75 years of independence has seen very significant strides in education, but we have not achieved our full potential. The reality is, over 2,000 years ago, India had Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallabhi and Vikramshila type institutions, which fundamentally transformed the landscape of global education. In fact, Takshashila and Nalanda had students from around the world. It was multidisciplinary. It had the entire gamut of liberal arts, humanities, social sciences. And so while at the dawn of Indian independence, we had 20 universities, and today we have 1,000 universities. We've expanded the higher education sector, and I want to speak about higher education in particular, as we have Mr. Arya speaking about school system in general. I think we have not paid enough attention to the role of higher education and its transformative potential for building a knowledge society. And what today we are doing, and the National Education Policy 2020 is a very good example of what India is trying to achieve when it comes to envisaging a future where knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination becomes the most central aspect of the future of nation building. This expansion of higher education sector from 20 universities in 1947 to nearly 1,000 now has seen extraordinary access. It has laid a lot of emphasis on quantity, but unfortunately it has neglected quality of higher education. So this aspect of quality ought to be the most important factor in the future. Lastly, I would say that by way of my ending my closing remarks, I would say that the life expectancy in India at the dawn of independence was nearly 35. Now it is over 70. Over 850 million people in India are less than 35 years of age. When most parts of the Western world will become older, most parts of Eastern world, including China and Japan, will become older, India will be younger and will be younger for a longer time. This demographic dividend that we have because of this situation can only be useful if we are able to provide high quality education to the young people who will not only shape the future of India, but also the future of the world.
Thank you so much for that introductory address. Before I go to Mr. Vikas Arya, and if I look at our topic today, the new normal in education system post-COVID effect, I remember listening to our skill education, the skill development minister about 4 years ago. And he said that India had to import dumper drivers from Chile. And they used to pay them about 1,60,000 a month just to drive dumpers. And he said, we don't have a single training institute for driving dumpers. He said, same for plumbers. He said, India during COVID had a shortage of plumbers because obviously your plumbers were from all and about. Most of them went to their village. So India was denied accessibility to basic professions because we don't have any courses to train such people. Traditionally looked down upon professions, but today if you see a lot of graduates are out of jobs and not everybody needs professional education, they need vocational education. And with that aspect, that's why school becomes very important because if not everybody is benefiting from professional education. If you don't benefit from taking a professional education, then many people will only opt for vocational education. So that's why schools need to be very good because that's probably the only education they get in their life. And what Professor Rajkumar said, very important, that we prioritize, in a sense, quantity over quality. Even if they are educated, it may not mean much because the quality is so poor. With that point, I would request Mr. Vikas Arya to give his introductory remark.
Thank you. It's very interesting, a way to look at the higher education sector. In terms of, if you look at the schooling sector, I'll first lay out as to what I feel is a fundamental challenge in the sector. And maybe it has its effects also on the higher education sector, but maybe I'll focus myself on the schooling sector. I think fundamentally, we're all quite confused as to how should the school education sector be handled. If you look at the schools and you divide them into different categories, you have the schools catering to the elite, which is like the IBs, and charging about, say, 1 lakh a month, and that's one layer. Then you have within the private schools, you have those catering to the middle class, which will be charging about 50, 60K, 70K per annum. Then you have the lower, absolute budget schools. Then you have government-aided schools, and then you have the government schools. And then you have some places, corporation schools as well. I think, plus this has been looked at as it's a concurrent subject. I think eternally there's a big confusion as to who really kind of ensures that you spoke about quality, right? So quantity, so one can measure how many buildings, how much square feet, what is the size of the classroom, right? So I think we've been overly looking at some of those aspects, right? And though there's some changes now, I think especially new education policy, online degrees, to my mind, is a huge, change in that particular direction. But staying again in the school sector, there's a lot of confusion in terms of how do you handle this sector. So state government, central government, the DEOs, the private sector, whether it should be even corporate, in sense whether you allow private players as a trust, not for profit. Even today, technically, you can't set up a school if you're a for-profit entity, right? So typically, you set a not-for-profit, then you have a management company, you still have private equity capital, private capital entering the sector, right? So it's actually completely, I think from a regulatory perspective, there's a big need to ensure that there's clarity on this. And allowing high-quality private sector to come in a clean manner, and especially I think not-for-profits, to come in a clean manner, I think is something which greatly helps. The NEP does, once again, talk about it. But I think structurally, I think there's a huge challenge that still persists. And because of that, the quality suffers. Because infrastructure can always be still measured. Quality of teachers, quality of the curriculum, the way it's being delivered, these aspects are extremely difficult to measure. Post-COVID, again, has its own sort of challenges, some for the positive, and some, I think, even from there's some additional challenges that have come up, but maybe that's something which we'll discuss, as we go along. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that introductory remark. I remembered a conversation I had about 5 days ago with a judge. We were having coffee, and he said his brother's son studies in a law school in Hyderabad, and he's been behind him to get admission at the Jingle Global Law School. And he's been convincing him that since you have already got you admitted, please forget it, just focus on your studies. So I think that I recollected this as I saw you. This happened about 4 days ago. Then I left for Bombay. I just came back yesterday. So that's in a sense, what I call that when institutes become places where a lot of students aspire to go. There is IITs, there's BITS Pilani, but in law, JGLU was able to make that mark in just 10 years. But my question comes in from there. For a certain class of people, yes, you've become aspirational. They say we don't want to go to UK, but we can get as good education here in New Delhi. To take it to the masses, do you think that's the big challenge for India? Because you, in your first introductory remarks, spoke about demography. We have so many students. Do you think India is facing that huge challenge, and that, in a sense, revealed itself during COVID, when none of us realized that so many doctors or medicine students are studying in Ukraine? We couldn't imagine that would be the number. What would you think of this? And in reaction to post-COVID, now what happened is, because in Ukraine, a lot of parents are not willing to send back their children to Ukraine for studies, which means these capacities have to be created here in India. What are the challenges?
Absolutely. Listen, I think, one of the things that these forums should facilitate is that we should be very candid about the state of affairs. I bet that if situation even slightly improves, all these students will go back to Ukraine. Because there are no opportunities here. The reality is we have far too many mediocre institutions which don't offer even reasonably good quality education.
But they charge a lot.
They charge a lot. And the large number of institutions are engaged in all kinds of dubious activities, and a very small number of good public or private institutions where accessibility simply to enter into it is difficult. And of course, I don't need to tell you about the situation of what happens with high school examinations, when I'm sure he knows this. I have to say this anecdote without mentioning the name of a college. A very leading college in Delhi University a few years ago, I was sitting with the principal, and a parent with his daughter walked in and said, Professor, my daughter wants to join your college. She's got 97% in 12th. And then the principal looked at the parent and said, oh, no, I can't talk to anybody less than 99, please leave. And that's not an exaggeration. And that year, the cutoff of that college was 100%. And I'm sure you can guess this. But the reality is, and then when I asked this principal that, you must be very proud of this, and I was sarcastic about it and said, you have this amazing student, for all you know, she doesn't get admission here, she may end up going to Oxford or Cambridge, because that's where people who go, don't get into colleges here, would go. And he said, Professor Saab, let me tell you, mera situation ye hai, कि 25 to 30% of my teachers don't come to work. I can't do anything about them. Another 30 to 40% have become very senior. I can't do anything about them. And then he said, बच्चे अपने आप पढ़ लेते हैं, हमको कुछ करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. And this is one of the leading top colleges of the country. So, talking about what you said, Tarun, that we have unfortunately neglected education as a nation-building project. Now, because of which today we are seeing huge challenges across mediocrity. I mean, in fact, every aspect you can pick it up. Today, across you, there is now, anecdotal evidence was there before, but now there is evidence across 10 to 15 states of India. Let's say office attendant positions are advertised. Pune, basically. The qualification is 7th standard and ability to ride a bicycle. You have lakhs and lakhs of engineers, thousands of PhDs, not fake ones, real ones, genuine ones, millions of undergrad degree holders applying for these 100 positions there across the country. So in a way, we can't escape. There is this whole idea that somehow we overcome the quality element by having more institutions is simply not possible. The second major challenge is the big public and private divide. If you see historically, the public investment in education has been reducing drastically. Barring the NEP, which has made promises, which is not yet implemented, education investment for public sector has reducing. And unfortunately, when we opened up in the higher education sector, the private sector, the privatization of higher education in India did not lead to the creation of Harvard University, which is the private university, Yale University, which is the private university, Stanford University, which is the private university, MIT, which is the private university. We ended up creating a lot of mediocre private institutions. So we really need to recognize and emphasize the need for quality, both in public and private sector. We need to focus a lot more on private philanthropy and significant investment through corporate social responsibility, where people are prepared to contribute to education. We need a regulatory environment which is providing freedom from regulation and a greater degree of institutional autonomy. Today, for example, every aspect of education is regulated. I mean, NEP promises it. Look at schools, for example. Schools which are, endeavors which have been created by individuals, they simply can't decide anything. They are dependent upon state government's mercy. The state governments decide what fees they should fix and what kind of salaries they should, even though they are not provided any funds by the government. So we have, unfortunately, messed up the system so badly that whatever attempts to recover today is both piecemeal and myopic.
Thanks for this very good exposition on this topic, and it only reminds me of my conversation with Nitin Nohoria. He was the erstwhile Dean of the Harvard Business School. I had a long conversation with him way back in 2015 at the Shram Shakti Bhavan, which is the office of the Ministry of Power, where he was come for a lecture, and we had lunch together. And he told me one thing: as a dean, one of my main responsibilities is to attract funding for Harvard. And I was able to attract 250 crores. That check was cut by Mr. Ratan Tata long back. I asked him, why so much money? You've got $45 billion. He said, without money, there is no education. You have to have money for education, and that's why all universities needs to be the for-profit, because if you don't have money, there is no education. And that is why my next question to Mr. Vikas Arya: if we don't have for-profit education institutions in India, why will people invest in this sector? You don't need to be clothed, and you should have, round tipping of funds here and there, which we all know what is the reality of this sector in India. For-profit institutions, will it change the kind of money we need? In a sense, we don't have to depend on philanthropy. If it's for profit, money will just flow in. What do you think about that?
So I think we should clearly have a regulatory framework wherein institutions should come forward and say, okay, we are a for-profit and you do. I think there's space for everyone.
Yes.
There is space for good not-for-profits to kind of work in the sector and for good for-profits as well, but just make them transparent. So that changes the whole dynamic. Right now, because you don't allow it in the right sense, so people are like using all sorts of means and methods, that's making things opaque and more difficult, for everyone. And another thing, just like to point out is on the teacher side, right? I think that's an absolute national crisis that besets the country. And it's something which, it's scary. Because, see, a regulatory framework can still change in a matter of a couple of years, bring in some law in the parliament, get things done. But I think we are in a state wherein you just don't have enough teachers in this country. And that's not going to change overnight. Even if you wake up and you decide to, just put some bills out there, get private investment, I don't think...
So you're saying buildings can come up, but teachers can't?
We have about 95 lakh teachers in this country, okay? Always 95 lakh teachers in this country. My, just guesstimate is that quality teachers, my senses would not be more than like a lakh or 2 lakhs.
That's all.
I think this balance amount is like see who gets into the, who wants to be a school teacher today, right? If you don't have any other, in most cases, and especially after the IT boom, right? So, previously you would have a lot of, cases wherein, say, even from good families, people would still want to look at education.
Precisely this is why I'll come to C. Rajkumar, because Professor Rajkumar, I speak to many professors from all over India. They aspire to have a job in your institution because you pay much better than the others. That is why you attract the best talent. And that is why I want to ask you, if you have for-profit institutions, do you think the quality of teachers will drastically go up?
So I don't want to comment on the school education, but I will say one thing. As far as higher education is concerned, I am convinced that the for-profit model would not work for a number of reasons. I think one of the reasons is that, and I've been a very staunch supporter of not-for-profit institutions, because I don't know of a single good university in the entire world which is a for-profit university, not one. So Harvard, you talked about Harvard Business School, it's an entirely not-for-profit. But we need to understand what the meaning of not-for-profit and for-profit is. The idea of a not-for-profit institution is that promoters or donors who put in money into the institution does not get any money out of it. And the fact that, and whatever additional resources that the university or institution makes is reinvested in the institution itself. That's a simple principle. Unlike, for example, a private equity investor investing in a mall or an aeroplane or something like that. This distinction is important because many things that the university does may not be able to be measured in the near term, and in any case its contribution is always much longer in terms of society.
That's a point. I'll now, before I take questions which all of you have given me, I want to ask you a question. In the US, we see people donating their entire savings to universities because they know good use will be made of it. Research and inventions do take place in these universities. India, we don't see that trend. Why?
So I think, well, first of all, US example is unique in the world. In fact, I had the privilege to study at Oxford, which is 800 years old, Harvard, which is 400 years old, and then, of course, Delhi University and Loyola, and then Hong Kong. But nowhere in the world, philanthropy of the kind that US, not just big universities, schools, colleges, alumni giving back, it's a culture. And they have given a phenomenal taxation framework so that, private individuals are able to get tax benefits out of that contribution. Unfortunately, in India, the lack of transparency in tax administration, including real benefits that philanthropists can have when it comes to investing, and lastly, we don't do enough to celebrate that philanthropy. In fact, one of the reasons why, and you mentioned about Tatas are still exceptional, they've done here as well, but even today, Indian philanthropists are much more comfortable to give it away to international institutions than in India for reasons ranging from they being better recognized and celebrated for their contribution abroad, maybe for perpetuity. All kinds of fears and concerns are around their mind, whether their money will be better utilized. A beautiful example is Warren Buffett, who gave away $25 billion to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, Warren Buffett himself has a foundation. His children have foundations. And when people asked why he gave the money to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he said he knew that his money will be better spent by the Gates Foundation.
That's a very important
That is the
point.
type of philanthropy we need to build.
And in fact, if we have some world-class institutes like the one you built, I think at least we will be to instill that confidence that if somebody pays in a donation, that money will be spent. I'll go to Mr. Vikas Arya and we will start our questions from the audience now. You're free to give the questions a pass in case you don't think they fit our discussion. Why 3-language policy is not acceptable to various states in India? You may choose to answer or give it a pass. Second, why not centralize and nationalize all private medical colleges and implement NEET in India? Third is, please give IS training, so that's irrelevant, but would you want to take that?
The language policy, what is the exact question?
The first one? Yeah. Why 3-language policy is not acceptable to various states in India?
Not acceptable. That's a purely political, it's just become a political tool. Actually, I think it's something which is, it's a pretty good, it's a pretty neat policy. And it should be overall adopted, but there are some challenges on this front. And let me just give an example. So now in multiple states, right? And I'll take Tamil Nadu for, wherein say we have our 10-odd schools. So at class 10 level, even in a CBSE school, the child has to write a Tamil paper in a class 10 board exam. And that to my mind is like so if a child, for example, it's a parent in the army, he gets a posting in Chennai and he gets to, say Chennai in 8th standard. How can he write in 10th standard a Tamil paper? And this is not in Tamil Nadu. A few other states also have it. So I think that this language, so mother tongue, absolutely. But then in a country as diverse as India, wherein people are constantly moving from one, state to the other, you cannot kind of accommodate everyone's mother tongue. For example, if we have in our campus, we have children from all parts of the country. So we can't start teaching in Gujarati, in Marathi, Bengali. We can't accommodate all these languages. Now, that's a very, very practical consideration as to how do you ensure that, you cater to different audience. So I think the NEP focuses more on mother tongue. But in a state, everyone may not be, having the same, mother tongue. There'll always be a minority that will be from different parts of the country. So that's an aspect that needs to be considered. But otherwise, it's a good policy to be, to be adopted. And, but for political reasons, yes, it does become even NEET, for example, is not adopted and accepted.
And this is a very important point because while it's a good policy, it has not taken into account the current state of nation. People are mobile. Today, for example, I am originally from the state of Tamil Nadu, but today when I go to schools in Tamil Nadu, there are students from across the country who are studying, one. And secondly, they may end up studying in Tamil Nadu for 2-3 years, then they'll go to West Bengal, then they go to Maharashtra. So somehow, any public policy need to have a mechanism for this. One of the ways by which one can do this is this kind of policy will be applicable for people who are continuously studying in a state for over a certain number of years. But that's the point which needs to be kept.
Now, a subsequent question for you, Professor Kumar. Does the brain drain start right from the education phase itself? In about 2 minutes, if you could explain that.
Yeah, so listen, I think people, there is something to be said about the fact that people look for opportunities and end up doing things to advance their careers and study plans. Like I knew, for example, that a large number of students from India went to and continuously go to China for medical education. This war gave us this new information that there are all these medical colleges in Ukraine where hundreds of our students. And I'm sure if we investigate it is more, there will be probably 20, 30 countries our students are going. Not because of the fact that they suddenly discovered that Ukraine and China are mecca of medical education. It just does, India doesn't provide opportunities. So we really, I say the same thing for this brain drain too. We need to create opportunities for our students in the form of education. And then we also need to create opportunities for our professionals to be able to work in those environments. Now, for example, I run a university which has 1,000 faculty. Over 100 of them are foreign nationals from 45 countries in the world. They are full-time faculty living in Sonipat. And then rest of my faculty are from around the world, Indians who could be anywhere in the world but are in India. So we need to create an ecosystem, a set of conditions. One of the reasons why many of our institutions, including IITs and IIMs and even big universities, have not been able to attract talent is that somehow a lot of people don't believe that their qualifications, experience, contributions will be adequately taken into account and their career trajectory will be duly recognized. By the way, this is not only unique for universities. You can even pick up private sector, for example. I know many working professionals will end up preferring to stay in other parts of India than in India. We need to, I'll give you a very good example. We were interacting with a bunch of Chinese students, 5 years ago. In fact, the Prime Minister had just been to Tsinghua University. He gave a big speech at Tsinghua University. And in an informal interaction, we were asking them why they are not thinking about India. Believe it or not, almost 50% of the students who were women, they said that they feel India is unsafe. Unsafe. India is not safe for women, and that's why they don't want to study. Now, these are very important factors that an international student will be taking into account. We can talk about data and experience and all of that and say maybe that's not right, but the perception is, and it's not a biased perception. They want to come to India, they want to experience India, but the reluctance that they have. So when you talk about education and India becoming a higher education destination, we need to address curriculum, course structure, infrastructure, transportation, urban planning, safety, safe neighborhoods, a whole range of things. Today, Australia has become a global destination for higher education because they have addressed and they continue to address all these things. Australia's second largest contributor to its GDP is education. They bring in students from around the world, including India, and that contributes to Australian economy. I don't see any reason why India cannot be, and not just for the large number of 50 countries in Africa, for Middle East, for South Asia, for Southeast Asia. India's long history and civilizational heritage has something to be said about. And the last thing I want to say is that there are students here. I want to encourage them to watch this absolutely amazing web series called Rocket Boys. If you have not already done, please watch it. It's the most inspiring thing you would ever see because it's a story of both Vikram Sarabhai, one of India's leading scientists, and Homi Bhabha. Both of them were Cambridge graduates in most difficult circumstances, pre-independent India. They left Cambridge, came back to India. C.V. Raman, who had already got the Nobel Prize, was the director of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And Homi Bhabha set up the laboratory there. And Vikram Sarabhai comes in, and they were building the future of Indian science. Of course, Dr. Abdul Kalam joins them much later. But that story tells how much of passion, commitment, dedication that these young scientists were. And at that time, Nehru was involving scientists directly, and academics were able to engage with the Prime Minister for building the future of Indian science. So in a way, it is only fair to say that regardless of whichever political party in power, we have neglected the role of universities. We have simply sidelined the entire educational project in our, zeal and enthusiasm to promote so many other things. The only way by which we can recover and retrace those steps that Vikram Sarabhai and Homi Bhabha and many, many other scientists did was to bring back education and universities to the center of our public policy and nation-building agenda.
Thanks so much for sharing all these points with all of us. One interesting question which comes from the audience, which now I'll take to because Mr. Vikas Arya, the post-COVID situation has created a digital divide here in our country. How can we tackle it now? This is very important also because we are the only country that straddles poverty of sub-Saharan Africa much more worse than it. and also some of the richest people. And this digital divide means they can't afford, I mean, even for phones, one professor once explained it to me. He says, Tarun, a poor quality phone won't provide you the user experience for you to study beyond 5 minutes, because you'll be so irritated after a point, you will throw your phone away rather than sit for the lecture. Think of all these students who study in government schools. Will they have such good phones? No. Do you think this digital divide India is facing, that's a big problem for us?
My sense is that the digital divide is not as serious as what it's sounding, for the simple reason that those who even had the phones and good stuff, all the good gadgets, etc., also from a percentage perspective, haven't learned much in the last 2 years, right? Simply because this online learning is especially in kids. See, again, as you mature, like in a university, in that particular age bracket, it would be very different. But if, for example, you look at an average home or middle class, upper middle class, right? You have like 2 laptops, you have this thing, etc. I don't think much of learning has really happened, except a small percentage, I'm sure, has done extremely well. So I think that children have to go back to school.
I want to ask you one more question.
Can I just respond to the digital divide?
Yeah. So yeah, they have to go back to school. But now, having said that, going forward, I think the hybrid model is there to stay.
Hybrid model is here to stay.
Yeah. So in the hybrid model, you're right that so I'm more concerned actually going forward as to what's going to happen now.
Now, once the physical is
once the physical has come up now. But so now I think the hybrid model is going to be extremely effective. Wherein you do say 70-80% of learning in the class, but the 10, 15, 20% of the the spike, that can happen to the hybrid mode. Okay. And I think that part, the children in the rural area, anyways, the physical also is not great. And even this part also, they are going to possibly suffer. So I'm more worried going forward than the last 2.5 years, wherein yes, those who had the gadgets, etc., it's slightly better, but I don't think it's made such a huge difference as my gut feel.
Just slightly add, and maybe slight difference I have in that. You see, first of all, UNESCO has estimated that 1.5 billion people in the world, young people, have been removed out of education due to the pandemic. And they were there, it's almost irrecoverable for these 1.5 billion people, what has happened in the last 2 years. Now, Indian experience is like other experience, but let me tell you give you some very sad Indian data. While online education was available for a lot of privileged schools, colleges, universities, I agree with him, universities were more effective. We had everything without uninterrupted for 2 years. Of course, one can argue about the learning experience and things like that. But the reality is, only 12 to 15% of Indian households, and I was shocked to get this data, only 12 to 15% of Indian households have 3 things which are essential for online education: a reasonably working electricity, reasonably working Wi-Fi, and a reasonably working equipment. So 85 to 88% of Indian households do not have this. So obviously no online education is happening. That's a lot of India and lot of school students and lot of university students. So if I were to suggest something, the most, while we, without sounding pessimistic, the next pandemic is not too far away. That's the reality. Every epidemiologist has already said it, and this is something going to happen. So this is a time for us to invest significantly in infrastructure, digital infrastructure across rural and urban India, high quality infrastructure, so that we are able to be better prepared for a future scenario whereby we will have to use technology, even if it means, as he rightly said, the quality of offerings that happens through education through technology is lesser. Because it's almost like if that is not there, the entire educational project is lost, as it has been the case with this.
And that is fear we all have, because as Mr. Professor C. Raj Kumar said in his first answer, the demographic dividend in a sense will mean that only today we have youngsters. 30 years hence we'll be a nation of old people who will need health care, who won't have enough money for their basic medical. Your government hospitals are totally inequipped. It's going to be a disaster for this country after 30 years if we don't get our education right, because we won't be as rich to take care of so many old people. Japan, I think, for as the only country today who is facing that problem, but because they're very limited population, they take care of it fairly okay. But to say the least, even they are facing a lot of problems because of too many old people. India will have a problem that the world has never seen. I'm reading the last question, which has already been answered, but I thought fitted to read out the question. So I'm reading it. Professor Rajkumar and Vikas Arya addressed the question. The discussion started on quantity and quality. In India, at the present moment, the quality education is really expensive and thus inaccessible to a large population of the country. How do you make the quality education accessible? It's been answered by the panel, but if they still would like to make a few points.
Sure. So I can give countless examples, but one of the things great institutions have always done is they have created access and scholarships for people to get education. In public institutions, we have used public funding. So for example, I would have spent 2,000 rupees for my Delhi University degree, but that's not what the cost of my degree is. Taxpayers of India paid for it. So when we charge a much higher fee in Jindal or any other private institution, we don't get any governmental subsidy. So we charge whatever fee that is needed, which is actually the cost of what the education gets is there. However, what both Oxford, where I got the Rhodes Scholarship, and at Harvard I got 3 scholarships. I didn't spend 1 rupee to go to Oxford or Harvard. My father is a professor and mother is a government doctor. I simply couldn't have afforded to go here, but I got those scholarships which gave me access to these places. We do the same thing at Jindal. We've spent some 275 crores in the last 10 years towards scholarships, and we try to provide access to as many students we can. We should be doing more, and we hope to do more. But the point is, there is no other way other than both government as well as private sector contributing to in the form of scholarships, which will ensure that the access is available for people who simply can't afford. Because what we ended up doing is, if we don't do this, we will compromise on quality and end up offering mediocre education, which we are already doing. As Nitin Noria rightly told you, quality education is expensive. In India, quality education can still be cheaper than what is offered at Harvard. I'll give you a very simple example. Harvard University annual tuition fee is approximately 75 lakhs of rupees. 60 to 75 lakhs of rupees. Now, that's obviously expensive. Now, we could offer in India an annual tuition fee of, say, 5 to 7 lakhs high quality education. Now, that's way too expensive for a lot of Indians, even though it is 10 times lesser than Harvard University. Now, who is going to help doing that? Well, somebody has to pitch in to make that contribution. It can be the CSR and private philanthropy and donors on the one hand, and of course, the government on the other. But if you compromise on the quality and somehow believe that you can offer high quality education for 10,000 and 20,000, we are being misled and misguided, because everything that an academic institution does is unfortunately expensive, but then much cheaper. It's a bit like, we all know this, the Gravity movie that Hollywood made. The total cost of that movie was less than India's Mars mission. So we could do frugal innovation. We are good at it. We have amazing people, scientists who work tirelessly, who might be able to pay a 7th pay commission and then be happy about it. They are not greedy and they are committed. But you can't further reduce it and say, you know what, why don't you do it for free? I mean, that simply doesn't work.
Point well taken. One final comment from Mr. Vikas Arya.
Thank you. To add to this point, and he's talking about schooling space, I would once again come back to the teachers. And I would like to stress upon that we need to do either two things. Either need to really better quality train your teachers now, or else you need to get people from other sectors to move into this particular space, right? Whom we can pay more, right? And whom we attract out here. But otherwise, like we know of n number of schools, like in this different parts of the country, wherein the promoters have spent like crores in land, building, etc. You just go and ask them, say, we just don't know where to get the teachers from.
Yes.
They just don't know. They don't have an answer. They say, can you provide? It's okay, we'll pay. We'll pay like 70K, 80K, 1 lakh, 2 lakhs, whatever you want, we'll pay. But just get me the people.
There are no teachers.
It's just not there. Quality.
Of
Quality.
course.
That's the key. Right? So to me, to make things accessible, and tier 2, we have traveled extensively. We have an associate program at the DV Group of Schools in Chennai, and we have traveled extensively to tier 2, tier 3 towns, in Tamil Nadu, and they are like, infra is fantastic. So money is not really a
issue.
See, a lot of people in India also, philanthropy actually is quite good. I hear people do it in a quiet way. People do their own bit. So I think money is there. I refuse to believe that, again, talking about schooling sector. Sure. Money is there. People do give, and in India, if you look at historically, there's a Gurukula system. It is all run by the local, right, local community.
So that raising money is not an issue. Getting teachers is an issue in you.
I think that's really the heart of.
I think if you go back and look at today's 45-minute discussion we had, we were lucky enough to get a lot of good points from both of our panelists. If some of these are heard by the people that matter. I think this, my last comment would be, if we could have some educations who are in parliament, some educationists who make it to parliament, and if these educationists are able to raise it among the 500 plus parliamentarians in the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha mainly, I think that will make a difference. Because you see there is no educationist in parliament, hardly. Education is the most important element of a society, and no educationists are, where is the last time you heard a...
Sports and movies.
That's all. Sports and movies. We have had actors who hardly even attend, but no educationists in the Rajya Sabha who could give speeches which could provide direction. I think that is what, as a society, as a government, we should look, that there should be at least 5-7 educationists in the Rajya Sabha who speak about the next 50 years of this country. And I think that's the forum where actions can be taken on the inputs that you've provided. But I would like to thank both of you for sparing time and joining for this panel. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tarun. Fantastic. My pleasure. You are amazing.
May I request Mr. K. Srinivasan, founder and chairman of Sansad Ratna Awards Committee, to please come and give a token of respect to our Jindal University Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rajkumar. May I request Mr. S. Mohan, who is our Vice Chairman for Sansad Ratna Awards Committee, to deliver a token of respect to Mr. Arya for giving his insightful speech. May I request Mr. Varadarajan, who is from the team Sansad Ratna Awards Committee, to give a token of respect to Tarun Nagia, who had made a wonderful conversation happen, and get the best out of the speakers we have on the dais. Tarun, just to add on, we are very glad to tell you that out of the best performing parliamentarians, the awards which we had given this morning, we had many educationalists turned politicians who are actually excelling in the parliament. So we have taken a bit notes of this, and there is something that we can do from the crux of this conversation. And the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Education, which is headed by Dr. C. Vinay, had been with us this morning. It was very unfortunate that he had to leave because he had to catch a flight, but I'm sure I'm going to share the crux of this conversation with him, and we would surely see what best can be done in the perspective of getting it legal, on law, so that things get much easier. And it was so insightful to hear all of you, and it was a mere pleasure to having you all with us. Thank you so much for your time.